for the Susan Taylor Podcast, where we discuss the yoga of mind, medicine, and healing. Author of Feeling Good Matters, Sexual Radiance, and the Vital Energy Program, Dr. Taylor imparts authentic knowledge and practical tools that inspire, educate, and empower us to be a healing force for positive change. So join us and take your life and our planet to the next level.
Hello and welcome to Podcast 65. What is stress all about? We all know that stress is the most harmful among all the factors contributing to poor health and early death. Although the stress response is designed to be helpful in saving our life with regard to protecting our biological functions, over the long haul it does cause a breakdown of our health and immunity. In today's episode, I'd like to talk about stress and Alzheimer's disease, why stress packs on the pounds, and give you 2 exercises to counteract stress. During the hunter and gatherer times, we would run and walk, and now we just sit and stare. We sit and stare at our computer. And that doesn't counterbalance the stress response, since the chemicals that are produced need to be metabolized, or shall I say they need to be digested after they're released into the system. And when a perceived threat happens to come into view, these chemicals get released. And notice that I say perceived. I always focus on the word perceived because as we train the mind and the energy field of the mind, our perceptions change. If we get up and run, we utilize those hormones that are released during the fight or flight, but we don't when we sit, and it causes harm. That's why people say, well, I'm stressed, I want to go sit and meditate. And I always say, no, allow yourself to get rid of those hormones. Go for a walk around the block, ride a bike, run up and down stairs, but don't just try to sit down after you've had a severe stress response. Today we're turning to the same life-saving reaction to cope with the fear, whether it's public speaking, we have difficult coworkers and supervisors, computer glitches even cause that turning on of that stress response, and even traffic jams. The sheer number of our perceived stress-inducing situations that face us on a daily basis can make it really difficult to turn the stress response off. And as a result, we're in stress overload with some real serious consequences like anxiety, depression, even belly fat, elevated blood pressure, and a heart attack possibly. And this is a spark of a real serious disease happening. So how does stress affect our body? First, let's look at what is stress. And as I say, a perceived threat. A threat both psychologically and also physiologically. So both of those work together. Since the time of CLA, we have known that the excessive levels of stress can cause an exacerbation of disease, in large part through the activation of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which actually elevates the circulating corticosteroid hormone called cortisol, in addition to other hormones, of course. And it produces a constellation of symptoms that occur in response to any form of stress, which he terms the general adaptation syndrome. And that was actually in 1950 when he did that. With our advances in science, we've come to fully understand how stress really increases disease symptoms and drives disease progression, and how disease disrupts stress response to produce both neuropsychiatric symptoms as well as the physical symptoms that we see. It's been termed what we call a feed-forward relationship between stress and disease. After reviewing a paper in the neurobiology of stress in 2018, there was a fellow who wrote it, Nicholas Justice, and he talks about the vicious cycle of stress, which he takes the position that stress drives disease and disease causes stress, feeding forward to accelerate disease progression while producing neuropsychiatric complications. It was quite fascinating. Although this is an oversimplification of the construct of really what happens, he uses it to illuminate the relationship between stress and Alzheimer's disease. That most certainly is much more complicated, of course. But to give you a quick overview, when you experience acute stress, be it real or imagined, as your body cannot really decipher the difference, your body releases stress hormones such as cortisol that prepare your body to either fight or flee in a stressful event. Your heart rate increases, your lungs take in more oxygen, your blood flow increases, and parts of your immune system become temporarily suppressed, which actually reduces the inflammation response to pathogens and other foreign invaders, because they'll come in because our mind field is totally disrupted at this point. When stress becomes chronic, our immune system even becomes increasingly desensitized to the cortisol. That cortisol, remember, that was the hormone that's actually released during the response. So it gets desensitized. And since inflammation is partly regulated by this hormone, this decreased sensitivity actually heightens the inflammatory response and allows inflammation to get out of control. And then inflammation, in turn, is the hallmark of most diseases, from diabetes to heart disease and even cancer, as well as psychological diseases. Elevated cortisol levels also affect our memory, causing a gradual loss of synapses in our prefrontal cortex. And that's all documented. And as I mentioned from Nicholas's paper, stress may even trigger the onset of dementia. There was a study done with nearly 3 out of 4 people who had Alzheimer's disease. They were patients. They had experienced severe emotional stress during 2 years preceding their diagnosis. And we've even seen that sometimes. I remember when I was working with nutrition clients who had had breast cancer, and I'd go back and I'd say, did you have an extreme stress response happen, a very extreme loss prior to any of this? And 10 years back, they would be able to bring something up. It was amazing. But we don't need a study to know that stress lowers immunity and is the basis for anxiety and depression. The premise is stress works both to create disease, not necessarily causing, let's say, Alzheimer's disease, as we're talking on that, or, any kind of cognitive or dementia issues. But like any disease, it causes immune changes and challenges also. But being in the disease state, it also adds to stress. So when you have the disease, your body is feeling the stress of the disease, but stress also can cause the disease. So you can see that it's a vicious cycle. And we can see that with anxiety. Stress causes anxiety, and when anxious, we get depressed, or not depressed necessarily, but we get stressed. Why does stress pack on the pounds? People have explained to me before, well, I have a lot of weight in my midsection, and it's because I'm stressed. Well, weight gain or difficulty losing weight in general is a common problem associated with stress. And what's worse, stress-induced weight gain typically involves an increase in our belly fat, which is most dangerous fat for our body to accumulate there, since it increases our risk for cardiovascular disease. At least that's what research is telling us. Stress alters the way fat is deposited because of the specific hormones and other chemicals our body produces when we're stressed. For example, there was research that showed that chronic stress stimulates our body to produce beta-trophin. Beta-trophin is a protein that blocks the enzyme that breaks down body fat. So you could read more about that if you just want to Google stress and body fat. Some say that developing resilience may lessen the impact of stress. Clearly, stress is our reaction to a perceived threat, and it seems to be more prevalent in modern day. We know that. So it's really important to understand how to deal with it, and that will determine whether it will translate into health problems later on. When we think about being resilient, we can say that the more resilient we are, the quicker we can pull back that stress reaction and not allow it to get into our cells on a very deep level. The scientific term for this resilience I'm talking about is the ability of our body to rapidly return to normal, both physically and emotionally, after a stressful event. So we really should say our ability of our body, but our mind to really get off of that emotionally charged event and bring ourselves back to home base. And some people are naturally more resilient than others, and researchers have they've pondered this for a long time, like why? I teach the concept of resilience with a little bit of an added twist because if we meditate, we change our perceptions. So as we meditate and we work with breath and work with really working with the energy field of the mind, our perceptions change because we don't view everything as a threat anymore. So what a perceived threat was today is not a perceived threat after we learn to really meditate. When we learn to meditate, we have a consistent practice. We actually learn to pay more attention to what's going on inside and not on the outside. We learn to respond and not react. We're able to step back and remain calm, consciously aware of living in the moment. And that's really what it's all about. Just managing breath is a start without meditation, and we can become conscious of ourself and not self-conscious anymore. We improve our internal communication with our body and our mind, and we can do that with just spending a few minutes each day with breath awareness, meaning focusing on our inhalation and exhalation. When we quietly pay attention to inhaling and exhaling without reacting, we begin to discover our own natural rhythm. And practiced over time, this exercise teaches us that by changing our breath, we can become less anxious, less attached to a reaction or even a current situation. It actually has been shown to improve reactions in what is perceived as a stressful situation. As you've heard me say, the key to mastering your health is working with breath. In fact, the way you breathe determines if you're balanced or you're off balance or in a non-resilient state. Breath work may reduce stress and help you discover greater resilience. Keep that in mind, especially, as I say, if you make diaphragmatic breathing your default breath. And I go over all of this for those that are new to this in our meditation master course that we have online. But there's other ways you can learn how to breathe. Of course, you can go to a class and learn how to breathe. So let me give you some exercises for those that want to get something out of this to counteract breathing-induced stress. Besides making you more aware of your physical and internal state, breathing practice can help you counteract breath-induced stress. And I've said that over and over again. If you're chronically stressed and have poor posture in addition to that, you're likely apt to be breathing high in your chest, and this kind of breathing can actually trigger the stress response and keep you locked in to that whole response. When you feel tense and anxious, the sympathetic fight or flight aspect of your nervous system turns on, and your breath begins to quicken, and your heart rate changes, your blood pressure, and your stress hormone production increases, as I mentioned earlier in this episode. Uncontrolled, rapid chest-oriented respiration feeds our fight and flight response, and it actually, as I said, initiates a sympathetic response. And it locks you in to that state. And I'm repeating that twice because I want to now give you some exercises. The first one, if we turn our sigh of frustration like, oh, not again, that kind of thing, and take those exhales that we have when we're frustrated, and that takes a cue from your autonomic nervous system to turn those sighs into exhales of relief. So you're just changing your thought process. So instead of exhaling in frustration, you're just releasing an exhale of relief. It's a simple way to tap your parasympathetic nervous system and get yourself avoid, boiling over into a real fight or flight response. And for this exercise, I would tell you, inhale through your nose for a count of 3 to 5, and exhale. When you exhale, you're ridding your body and mind of tension and fatigue for a count of at least, I like it twice as much, but even 7 or longer if you can do that. And repeat this for at least 1 to 2 minutes. And this is my version of the 2-to-1 breathing that I teach in our meditation classes. So if you're breathing in for 3, you can exhale for 5. If you're breathing in for 4, you can exhale for 7. If you're breathing in for 5, you can exhale for 7. Whatever feels comfortable for you without holding your breath. Do not hold your breath. The second exercise is to breathe away tension. Stress-induced breathing reduces the function of our diaphragm, as I've mentioned in last week's podcast, and it reinforces our poor posture, which in turn leads to pain, loss of mobility, and migraines. So proper breathing can help restore the function of your diaphragm, improve your posture, and reduce pain. So for this exercise, I say sit in a chair and relax your shoulders. Place your hands on your lower part of your ribs and bring your elbows forward. And as you breathe in, feel your ribs expand outward, moving your hands further away from each other. So there's an expansion. When exhaling, engage and squeeze your core muscles to completely empty your lungs. And pause there for a moment, just to be aware before your next inhalation. The key is to have no pause between the inhalation and exhalation. So you want to work up to just inhaling and exhaling with little to no pause. So there are stress management techniques because we know that stress is widespread and it's very pandemic in today's modern world. And we're all suffering from it on some level, especially if we're planted in front of a computer all day. And there are many different stress reduction techniques. The key is to find out what works best for you and stick to a daily stress reduction program. One key strategy is breath, as I mentioned, but another is to make sure you get adequate sleep, as sleep deprivation dramatically impairs your body's ability to handle stress, and it's yet another risk factor for heart disease or heart attack in general. In addition, you have regular physical activity helps, meditation training, social connectedness actually helps. Instead of getting on our iPhone or whatever kind of phone and texting, pick up a phone and say hello to someone, or in fact, go meet them and go for a walk. Spend time in nature. Listen to music or study music yourself. Schedule a time to have fun. You can use aromatherapy. Pick something and follow it for 40 days and see if your anxiety levels, your stress levels have diminished. Do your research and find what suits your needs best. Any questions or comments, let me know. And that brings us to the end of this episode. Contact us at susantaylor.org if you have any questions, comments, or feedback. Keep in mind that I'm going to be traveling to India, so I'm going to take 2 weeks off, probably February 10th and 17th, and I'll be back on the 24th. So just stay tuned. We'll have a few more after this one. And thank you for listening. The Susan Taylor podcast does come out every week. Any questions or comments, something you might want to hear, contact us at susantaylor.org. And until next time, remain calm, consciously aware, living in the moment.